Well, spring has really sprung up here. The azaleas and the dogwood are in bloom, and the trees are starting to get their leaves and starting to look green and lush. And it's a beautiful time of year. It really is. The only disadvantage is the amount of pollen. So if you're very subject to having some kinds of a reaction in your sinuses to the pollen, this would not be a good place to be right now. Our deck was green this morning, but it's not painted green. It's not a green natural color, but it's green from algae. And as the wind blows across the lake, you can see on the surface of the water all of the pollen from the trees. So there's a lot of pollen out there right now. We're looking at Isaiah chapter 14, and it's really two prophecies. It breaks at verse 28, because then we find there's an actual dating the death of the king Ahaz. So we have verses 1 through 27, which is a rejoicing area. It talks and prophesies about overcoming Babylon captivity and the fact the Assyrians would knock out Babylon. There's a rejoicing even by nature in the fact that Babylon will be done away with, and we see that Cyrus will come along and help the nation of Israel to reestablish the temple in the territory. And it's a happy beginning chapter. It's a time prophesying of the end of captivity and showing God's power over even the greatest of nations. And so we see that this rejoicing reminds you of the little song that we sing in church. Even the trees will clap their hands, and we see that kind of rejoicing even in nature as Israel is restored to its land. And one of the things that I wanted to make note of, and I think you'll want to look at as you look at chapter 14, is that the people of Israel have had an impact on the Babylonians. Now, there's no question Babylonians had some impact on the nation of Israel, but here we find words that tell us that the people of Babylon and other people that the Israelites have come in contact with will join their faith. And that's really what I want to focus on for today's devotion. You see, we should be an influence. We should be a salt. We should be a light in our world. We should have an influence on those around us. And that's exactly what Israel did when they were taken into captivity in Babylon. Many of those that came back to the land were not Israelites. They were people from Babylon. They were people from surrounding countries because they had had an impact, because they had seen the power of the Israeli God. They had seen the power of the faith that the Israelis had. And so we see even King Cyrus, of course, who comes along from Assyria and helps them reestablish the land, sees a living God, a God that's above all other gods, King of kings and Lord of lords. And we should be that kind of salt out in the world around us as the people from Israel were, even when they were taken into captivity. In verses 28 and following, we find that this is at the time that Ahaz dies. That's about 715 BC, 715 years before Christ. And it's a new prophecy, and it talks about comforting the nation of Israel. They were worried about the Philistines, and the Philistines had been a torment to them for years and years and years. But Assyria, when they came in, took them under control around 712 to 701 BC. So this was an area of prophecy, not of the destruction of Babylon and the king of Babylon, but rather this was a section of comfort saying, don't worry about the Philistines. We're going to take care of them. And it's going to be a time of peace, time of prosperity, a time of renewal. And it's chapter 14, if you were an Israelite and living in that day, would be a wonderful chapter. You'd see the end of your oppressor and your captivity, and you'd see the beginning of a peace and a reestablishment of the land and of the temple. So, my friends, we may be going through what I consider to be, in my lifetime, one of the worst times in America ever, as from the standpoint of the uh, standards and values and ethics, social injustice, all that's going on, calling good evil and evil good. But my friends, there's a better time coming. I hope that we're in chapter 14 very shortly, that we'll see the destruction of the enemy and that we'll see the restoring of the power of God and the nation. But I read ahead in the book. We win in the end. I'm not sure how far we are from the end right now, but we win in the end. And you should take good courage of that. It should be a comfort to you, just as chapter 14 of the book of Isaiah was a comfort to the nation of Israel. And that's my thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.